Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, warshippers of all ages, welcome to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today it's time for our first look at upcoming Tier 11 German heavy cruiser, Clausewitz. I've kind of been slacking on first look videos of late, guys. Every time it feels like I sit down to try to kind of get into one, they basically release the ship on me, and I'd say, oh, God, if I'd been a week earlier, I would have had it done. I'm a little trailing on this one, but I feel like it's worth it because they've recently made some changes to Clausewitz DPS that I think are worth noting and worth talking about. They're not going to show up in the screen when I unroll everything, but they've been announced in the dev blog. We'll talk about them as we go. Clausewitz, of course, named for famed German, or Prussian, more accurately, General Karl von Clausewitz. Never did actually complete his famous work on war before he died, but has since become one of the more seminal text. Would you really consider it a reference book, a textbook? I guess you probably would. It's very philosophical, I'm led to believe, based on what I've read and the people I've talked to who have read it, talking about the interaction of war and politics and all this sort of thing. So very much an accomplished German soldier and a bit of a philosopher of war and combat, and his name now coming into the game here in World of Warships as the Tier 11 German cruiser. So let's look around. Now, as a Hindenburg fanboy, I am super excited for this ship, okay? They've got a pretty high bar to get over to get me interested. So let's see if they've, just kind of, let's see if they've achieved that. Starting as we do with survivability, 58,000 hit points, even 16% torpedo protection. Now, of course, 58,000 hit points is quite solid, but it's not good for best in tier here at Tier 11 cruisers, the ones that we know of that have been announced so far. Conde coming in, of course, at 63 and change. And then, of course, there's a ton of even Tier 10, quote-unquote, super cruisers. I'm looking at you, Stalingrad or Puerto Rico, that have more hit points than this. Still, with all of that said, this is quite respectable. There's not a damn thing wrong with this many hit points, right? It is still about 5,000 or 6,000 hit points more than Hindenburg has. So that's nice. You get a health buff. And the ship is physically larger. If you were to put these two hulls side by side, it would be notably bigger. Armor layout. This is one of the major places that Clausewitz differs from Hindenburg. And I'll show this to you. Actually, it's probably easier for me to actually, no, I'll talk about Clausewitz first, and then I'll show you Hindenburg so you can see the difference, all right? So, Clausewitz, 27mm bow extremities. This is very typical of a high-tier traditional heavy cruiser. She does have this 40mm bow strake. Doesn't quite go all the way to her bow, but most of the way there. So again, if you're showing somebody a decent enough angle, they're aiming for your waterline, chances are they won't be able to overmatch this plating. The belt armor picks up right here just forward of turret number 1, or turret A, and it is 130mm. I'll turn that torpedo bulge off so you can see it. 130mm all the way through, all the way back to this 90mm plating back over the rudder pintles and the steering gear. So, a little better armored than a Hindenburg, not significantly. Hindenburg's belt is about 110. Compare her to the other Tier 11 ships. Conde is also 130mm. So she's got decent enough armor for what you would expect out of a heavy cruiser. Now, what are the big differences from Hindenburg, right? Hindenburg was a ship when she first came into the game that was considered fairly tanky. And even today, in certain engagements, certain situations, she is capable of sustaining a tremendous amount of punishment. But Hindenburg's main weakness, in my experience, all the games that I have in the ship, is that her deck armor is not amazing, right? She'll take full pins through her deck, shells coming in either at a high arcing angle, that long-range plunging fire that the German cruisers are very vulnerable to. This ship retains that, by the way. You're not going to get rid of that. That's inherent to the type. But more appropriately, this ship likes to fight at mid-range. So you're in the 12 to 15 kilometer range. The battleship shells come in at more of an angle, right? But sometimes they'll still full pin you through the deck. Clausewitz attempts to correct some of this by buffing the deck armor here. You see it's 50mm. All right, now let me go show you Hindenburg. If memory serves, Hindenburg is 30mm, and that is a significant buff if my memory is correct. and it is. 30 millimeters casemate versus 50 millimeter casemate makes a significant difference. The amount of shells now, certainly other heavy cruiser shells, certainly super cruiser shells that will be coming at you, landing onto your deck at mid-range, versus even some of the battleship shells will potentially bounce off your deck with this better deck armor. Now, it's not going to protect you from AP bombs, right? Dropped from planes or anything like that. But this is a noteworthy buff, okay? Let's make sure she retains her turtleback armor, and right there you see that she does. So that's always good to see. We like that. There we go. Get that back on so you guys can see we're not cluttering up the screen. But yeah, she retains her turtleback. Looks like it is a 60 millimeter turtleback right there. So if you get this thing into a brawling situation, she should be fairly difficult to Citadel. The armor scheme is very typical of Hindenburg, right? The Citadel is quite low in the water. It does protrude perhaps a little above the waterline, but not too terribly much. If you take this thing in to do a close range brawl, you will probably not get Citadel. You'll take full pins for days because you are still a German cruiser, but you probably won't get Citadel. So yeah, armor scheme, definitely an improvement over Hindenburg. Maneuverability and concealment. 32.5 knots, 820 on the turning circle, 12.3 on the rudder shift. Each of these, the speed is a little better than Hindenburg, which is nice to see because Hindenburg is pretty slow for a Tier 10 heavy cruiser. The turning circle and rudder shift are each just a touch worse. I have a feeling this ship's gonna feel like a Hindenburg in terms of handling. It might actually feel a little worse because you've sped the ship up and you've made her a little less responsive on the rudder. But the bottom line is I expect it to be feel fairly comparable. The whole shape is the same. The overall length is pretty comparable. And then, the overall handling characteristics are pretty close. Concealment, 16.3 on the surface. Compare that to Hindenburg's 16 flat. And you're not really getting a massive, there's certainly no buff here, but it's not a massive downgrade, right? It's a little worse. A full stealth rig, Clausewitz, will come in at 12.8 on the surface. When you compare her to her contemporaries, her other Tier 11 contemporaries, that is not quite worst in tier, again, because Conde exists. She's a full stealth rig. Conde is 13 flat, but obviously Edgar and Annapolis are stealthier than this. This is, again, a ship that you're going to want to play in mid-range anyway. Stealth is not what this ship is designed for. It's not what she's ever going to be good at. You're just going to have to learn to live with that. But by the time you've played enough Hindenburg to pick this thing up, you probably have a pretty good idea of what that means for you. All right, so let's go have a look at the main battery. Clausewitz's main battery is comprised of four 210 millimeter four turrets of 3 barrels each of 210 millimeter guns. You have 2 here forward of the bridge and the superstructure, and 2 back aft. These guns reload every 9 seconds, and you see there 22.5 seconds on the turret traverse. Turret traverse is identical to Hindenburg. Reload is a smidge better. Hindenburg's base reload is, I gotta find it here, 9.8 seconds, right? And these are 9 seconds. By the time you put main battery modification 3 on these guns, they reload every 7.9 seconds. DPS-wise, when you compare this ship to... actually, let me talk about the shells first, okay? HE shells, you see there, it has been updated. Earlier, it hadn't updated in my UI, but now it has 29, 50, and 15% fire chance. Those are the new values for Clausewitz. Those were recently announced in a devlog. They have come to live for testing. This is a significant improvement over the shells that Hindenburg was firing down at Tier 10. Those are, I believe, 2,400 damage, 2,500 damage, something like this, on a 13% fire chance. And of course, you are getting just a little bit of extra pen there. You see there 53 millimeters of pen because these aren't 203 millimeter guns, they're 210 millimeter guns. So lots to like about the main battery. You're also getting a small range buff as well, 18.5 there on the surface. Hindenburg's base range is 17.8. So everything just a little better. Even the armor-piercing shells, Hindenburg's come in at 5,900 apiece. You see there the 210 millimeter shells here on Clausewitz are 6,200. So kind of a buff across the board, right? Every little individual characteristic of her main battery gets better. But how does she stack up to her contemporaries, right? If I put her aside, let's put her alongside, let's say, Annapolis, okay? From a purely HE perspective, Annapolis beats this ship out because Annapolis is a better reload, right? Like you're not going to keep up with that, okay? Annapolis doesn't pen quite as much. Her fire chance is slightly less, but just on sheer reload, Annapolis has about a 40% advantage in terms of HE DPM. Now, this ship also trails Annapolis because of the reload by about 100,000, about a 20% on the AP, right? So about 100,000 DPM, excuse me, better as Annapolis. But Hindenburg's got some more things going for her. I mean, Hindenburg, Clausewitz, right? Got some more things going for her. So you have the torpedoes. You're not purely a gun cruiser like Annapolis. I kind of expect the Annapolis guns to be a little better. Compare those numbers to Hindenburg, and the HE DPM here is about nearly a 30% buff over Hindenburg. The AP is about a 15% buff over Hindenburg. So if you're used to playing Hindi, right? You're used to being an HE spammer at long range, and then maybe when someone shows you the right shot, you fire the AP, or if you push in close, you fire the AP. The playstyle isn't going to change here. Clausewitz just does it better. Her HE shells hit harder, she fires them faster, they have a higher fire chance and more penetration. Across the board, these guns are a buff from Hindenburg. So that's nice to see. That's good to see. Now, one thing I want to look at before we get too far away from talking about Clausewitz's main battery is the firing angles on the guns. This is incredibly important when you're talking about heavy cruisers and all these sorts of things. You know, how many times have we talked about the firing angles on Seattle being one of the major problems with that ship? So we need to try and figure out if Clausewitz has the same problem, or if there is a problem. And the short answer is not really, at least not if you're pushing. Hindenburg can get all 4 of her turrets into action starting at 35 degrees off of her port or starboard bow. For Clausewitz, that number is 37 degrees. So it's a very small difference, but so minute you probably won't notice it. However, there is a much bigger difference in the stern angles. Hindenburg can bring all 4 of her turrets to bear about 36 degrees off the stern. So it's about the same, about 35 degrees off the bow, about 36 degrees off the center line of the stern for Hindenburg. That's good. That gives her very symmetrical firing angles, very comfortable to play the ship that way. Clausewitz, on the other hand, her forward guns do not turn back as far as Hindenburg's do, right? So the problem with Clausewitz is these forward guns, when you're shooting aft, the firing angle is over, let's see, it looks like it is 47 degrees off the center line. So it's over 10 degrees worse when you are kiting and retreating and firing over your shoulder. So what that means is when Clausewitz is in a kiting position, when you're running away, you're going to have to expose a lot of your ship to bring all of your guns to action. You're probably safer to just either find something else to shoot out with the bow guns and just fire the stern guns as you run, or be very, very cautious about how you turn, to how much of your ship you show, and when you show it, timing the reload on a battleship, let's say, before you fire, you turn to get all of your guns to action over your shoulder in a chase. You do have some secondary batteries here. With about an 8.3 kilometer range. That's actually a lot of range for German secondaries. You could theoretically, once upon a time, you could have attempted to build a German secondary battery cruiser. We saw that with Eigert and Siegfried. This would have been another, or their earlier test versions, this would have been another good candidate for that, with 5 of these double-barreled 128s running down each side of the ship. But alas, probably not so much. Good reload time. You might get a little damage out of these if you get into close in point-blank range with somebody. If you're hunting a destroyer or something, you might get a little chip damage out of those. Torpedoes. If this is the same song, if you're used to playing a German cruiser, these are the exact same torpedoes that every other German cruiser in the game gets. 6-kilometer range, 64 knots, 13.7 on the Alpha. The difference here is these are 5-tube launchers. She has 2 5-tube launchers on each side of the ship, on a longer reload, obviously, because the extra tube means that they reload significantly slower than the 4-tube launchers that you got on Hindenburg. So just like Hindenburg, you are well equipped to push in and brawl and deliver devastating strikes with your torpedoes. Your armor scheme will allow you to do that. The trick is you're gonna, it's one of these things. Just like playing Hindenburg, you have to survive a withering gauntlet of fire while you move up to try and deliver those torpedoes. So it needs to be the sort of thing that you've either planned very well or using island cover to move up or that sort of thing. But you've got the torpedoes; they're still there. They still hit like trains. They'll be excellent. Anti-aircraft defenses. This is one area that I'd really held out a lot of hope for Clausewitz when you compare her to Hindenburg, and it's an area where Hindenburg's AA is pretty solid. Clausewitz is also solid, but I wished for better. Let me explain what I mean. For starters, you see here 6-kilometer range out to the outer bubble, 6 flak puffs. That's nice, and then not exciting, but like not terrible. And then there's your DPS bubbles, 140 out to 6 kilometers, 312 on the back of the 55 millimeter garrots there in the mid range, and then a whole bunch of those 30 millimeter flat guns make up a 3-kilometer inner bubble with nearly 400 DPS. So she's got a much stronger inner bubble than Hindenburg ever had. Where I kind of crinkle my nose and go, oh, that sucks a little bit, is the flak. I had hoped for more flak, and it's not there. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. If anything, actually, if memory serves, let me check this real fast before I say it. I believe that Hindenburg's outer bubble is actually even better than this, and it is. Hindenburg's outer bubble is just a few points better than Clausewitz, which feels kind of crappy, right? Honestly. So that sucks. The one thing that Clausewitz absolutely does better on the AA than Hindenburg is she has more range. The German cruisers up to tier 10 are hard capped at a 5.2 kilometer outer AA bubble. It didn't used to be that way. Under the old AA system, they had the same outer bubble that the American heavies and the Japanese heavies, everybody had. It was like 5.8 or 6.0 or something like this. In the new system, the new AA system, the Germans were all artificially deflated to 5.2 kilometers. That's where Hindenburg remains today. Clausewitz claws some of that range back. She goes out here to 6 kilometers. I'm a fan of that, right? The more time you get to sink long-range AA, the more opportunity you have for flak, the better. So the AA is overall stronger than Hindenburg, but in practice, I'm curious to see how it actually deploys. I need to put a couple of games in to get a feel for it. She does have little airstrike depth charges as a cruiser here, a heavy cruiser. Most heavy cruisers don't have depth charges that roll off the back, and Hindenburg does not either. Out to 8 kilometers, only a couple of bombs in each. So 3 bombs in each, excuse me. So I mean, I don't know. I got dumpstered by aerial depth charges in a submarine game the other day. So obviously, some of the changes they're making to this mechanic is improving. So that's good to see. Let's have a look at consumables. I'm expecting to see more of same. Of course, we're shipping World Warships. We're getting damage control party. We have our choice between hydro and standard defensive fire. This is, of course, the good German hydro, 6-kilometer range. Nice to see. You have a choice between spotting aircraft and fighter. This is the same choice that Hindenburg gets, and a standard high-tier cruiser heal. These are exactly the same consumable options that you have on Hindenburg at tier 10. Nothing unusual there. So yeah, Clausewitz. In short, she is basically a beefier Hindenburg with a better main battery and a improved armor scheme. Potentially worse handling. I'm curious to see in action for myself. But if you like Hindenburg, like I do, there are definitely things to like about this ship. I simply have to hope that they translate well into the game. I'm generally not a huge fan of this tier 11 ship concept. Okay, so if Wargaming is going to sell me on this idea, it's going to come on the back of a ship like this. That's the bigger, larger, badder cousin to a ship I already love, right? Like Edgar, HMS Edgar over in the British tech tree. I love Minotaur. Edgar is super Minotaur, right? And so I like the idea of Edgar, but I still as a whole, I'm kind of dubious of this tier 11 ship thing. We'll have to see how it plays out. Anyway, guys, there's our first look at Clausewitz. I hope you enjoyed that. Wash your hands. Be safe. I'll catch you next time.